to do a quick little wet fly for you today. This is called the Getland. It's another fly out of Ray Bergman's book. It's I can't say necessarily a classic pattern from the standpoint of well-known, but it's been around for a long time. The thing that interests me about this fly is it's very similar to a fly I did a video on a year ago called the Abbey. And the Abbey, there is a golden pheasant tail and it's red floss for the body, but otherwise it's the same gold tinsel for the tip and the rib, as well as brown hackle for the throat and mallard flank for the wing. And I find this kind of fascinating because I wonder in some regards in fly tying if some of the variations that we get, like the Getland, is just a minor variation of the Abbey. Well, if the Abbey came first, then is the Getland made based on the Abbey, or vice versa, or were they both created, relatively the same time in different parts of the country or the world? I don't know. Just interesting facts, interesting things about wet flies and fly tying in general. But it's a pretty quick, simple pattern. That's the Getland, and I'll get started. Start the Getland by putting my hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 3399 in a size 6. I use in a lot of these wet fly videos, I use a model 3399, which is kind of a traditional wet fly hook. However, keep in mind you can use like a Mustad 3906 or 3906B, which is a standard nymph hook as well if you do not have this particular hook. I'm going to debarb the hook and attach my thread. For thread, I'm using a white Danville 6/0. I've already put some wax on the thread. I'm going to attach my thread about an eye length behind the eye of the hook and advance it down the shank to the end of the body. The Getland does have a tail in it, so I'll have to apply the tag and then the tail first. Tag or tip, I'm not certain which it's called because I've heard and seen in many different recipes that this is a tag, or it's also referred to as a tip. I'm going to secure my tinsel in, and I'm going to wrap it in 6 wraps down the bend of the hook to form the tip, and then 6 wraps back up. These just need to be little touching turns, and then we'll secure that in. Now the tail and the hackle on the Getland are both made out of just a brown hackle. I'm going to use some Schlappen for this. A lot of times when you get some strung Schlappen out of the pack, you'll get 1 or 2 feathers that just have some barbs that are either busted up a little bit, like this one right here, or just not that great for the throats. So you can put some of these aside and just pull a few out for like tail material. So that's what I'm going to do with this. I've got a feather here, and all I'm going to do is just take maybe a dozen barbs, something like this, peel that off, bunch them together, measure that about the length of the shank of the hook, maybe a little longer if that's what you like, and then wrap that in. I'll trim this the length of the body. Now I'll put in my rib, and I didn't mention before, for the tip and the rib I'm using a Danville silver and gold Mylar tinsel in a size 16 and 18. We want the gold side up on the rib, so I'll tie this in with the silver side up. Secure that in. The body of the Getland is green floss. I'm using a Danville 4-strand Rayon floss for this. And I'm using, on this size 6 hook, I'm just using 3 of the 4 strands. If you want a thicker body, you could certainly use all 4. If you want a thinner one, just go with 2. Secure that. More wax on my thread. I'll advance my thread forward in touching turns. Bind those in along the hook shank and give myself a nice smooth underbody. If you wanted to, if I were tying some of these to be framed or something like that, I might go to the trouble at this stage to flatten the thread as I'm advancing it forward, just so that it would be even a little bit smoother under there. Once my thread is in place, I've got a good eye length behind the eye of the hook. I will apply the floss body and then 5 wraps of the tinsel for the rib. Body and rib secure, I'll move my thread up to behind the eye of the hook and I'll change over to the black thread to finish out the fly. I'm using a Danville 6/0 in black. I've already waxed this thread, so I'm just going to attach it right behind the eye of the hook, advance backwards a little bit, not quite all the way to the back of the head. That way I can trap the white thread and the tag end of black, and then advance back a little bit further, and that will cover up the snipped ends of the black and the white thread. Now we'll tie in our throat. As I mentioned, the throat's just a brown hackle. I'm going to go ahead and use a Schlappen feather for this. I'm just going to take maybe 1/4 of an inch or so off each side of this particular feather. I want to try and keep those together so that the tips are even. I'll get some from both sides and I'll bring those up underneath the fly. I like the tips to go back about halfway down the throat in the gap of the hook. A little pinch and loop, and our throat is in. The wing on the Getland is just some gray mallard flank. I've recently published a number of different flies that use gray mallard flank, and I've got some videos on different ways you can do that. I'm just going to use some loose mallard flank. I'm going to get a fairly medium-sized feather, something like this, I've already stripped away the fluff, and I'm going to cut the center of that out, and then I'm just going to fold those together, bringing those together to form my wing, something like that. We only need the wing to be about halfway down the length of the tail, so it doesn't have to be that long. Get that in place. Pinch wrap. Make certain that that pinch wrap is in the position you want it to be in, and it doesn't slide forward up to behind the eye of the hook. There we are, right at the back of the head. Put in 3 or 4 wraps to secure that. We'll take a look. With that securely tied in, I'll trim away the excess. Bringing my thread down to the eye of the hook, I'll advance backwards, covering up those butt ends and forming the head of the fly. I'll flatten my thread out here before I put in my whip finish. Nine or 10 turn whip finish. That will smooth that off and secure the head for us. And our Getland is done. I'll head cement here. Just a little drop on both sides. That will soak in and secure all those thread wraps. And in a moment, I'll come back and put a couple coats of black lacquer on that. Keep it nice and shiny, and it'll be all sealed up and well protected. So there's the Getland. As I mentioned, it is similar to the Abbey, with the exception of the green floss body. The Abbey has red floss, and then the Abbey also has golden pheasant for the tail and not just brown hackle. It's a quick and easy little wet fly. If you've been following along and tying any of the flies that I've done recently and you've got your mallard flank out, then the Getland is another fly that you can very quickly knock a few out with that mallard flank in no time and add to your fly box. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.